I know we're mostly talking about television, but let's take a little detour into feature films. In 1969, you did a film with Katharine Hepburn. What was that experience?
Oh my, The Mad Woman of Chaillot. It was extraordinary. It was just amazing. The cast was unbelievable. Katharine Hepburn, Yul Brynner, Julieta Messina, Edith Evans, Danny Kaye. It was just an amazing, amazing cast. We were filming in the south of France, in Nice. They put us up, it was one of the last of the big spending companies. They put us up at the Voile d'Or in Cap Ferrat. Oh my God. Margaret Leighton was in it, Michael Wilding, who were great friends also. And Donald Pleasance. And Donald Pleasance and I had a long scene that, because most of the film was filmed outdoors in Nice, in case of rain or something, they have the cover set, which you then run to if the weather's bad and you do that scene. Well, it never rained. So they kept me around forever and ever and ever in the south of France at the Voile d'Or with great per diem and everything till practically the end of the shoot. And we finally did our scene. But it was, and working with Kate was amazing. She's such a gigantic personality. And being around her is wonderful. A little intimidating, but really wonderful. I used to sit around at the Voile d'Or and just listen to these people talk about Yul Brynner, talk about showbiz and all their experiences. And one day I was swimming in the sea, and I came out, and there was nobody around in the sort of outdoor seating area except because Julieta was there. Fellini kept hanging around, which was driving Brian Forbes, our director, crazy, because Fellini was like the greatest director in the world at the time, with his big hat and his almost cape-like overcoat and all that, and hanging around the set and everything. But anyway, there was Fellini and Danny Kaye and Katharine Hepburn sitting at this table having champagne. It was after the shoot. It was in the afternoon. So I said, "Come, sit down, Richard, sit down." And Kate was saying, "Ah, Federico, you and Picasso," she said. "You and Picasso, you both started out great. And then you went crazy." She said, "Julieta the Spirits. What is that all about? What is that all about?" And I couldn't imagine anybody talking to Fellini this way. And then she decided it was time to go home. She had to go to bed. And she left. She was, in her kind of fatigues and stuff. And as she was walking away, Fellini said, "She is afraid of the night. She is afraid of her dreams." And he was so on the nose, absolutely on the nose. But that was a thrilling experience. But working with all those people in the south of France, oh my God, it was great.
And from that to an Irwin Allen all-star cast, The Towering Inferno.
Yeah.
You played a villain in that.
Yes, yes.
Was that a kick or what?
I was really smarmy. I got to be hit in the stomach by William Holden, for Pete's sake, and die an ignominious, is that a word, death at the end and all. It was amazing. I mean, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, O.J. Simpson, Fred Astaire, Jennifer Jones, all these people, Faye Dunaway. And it was mostly filmed in one set, the ballroom set. And so everybody just hung around there. And you'd sit in on these various conversations and stuff and talk to people. And it was completely fascinating. Paul Newman had an interesting method in that film. He would get, before any particular scene that he was doing, he'd get in this huge fight with the director. I thought, what's going on? And the director would suddenly say, "Okay, let's shoot it." And Paul would shoot the scene. And it was actually a kind of preparation. It was a way of his preparing. I don't know that they acknowledged that, but it was definitely a means of, getting hyped up for the scene for him. I thought that was very interesting.
The Three Musketeers. What was that like, that experience? And then you did some other, that was a feature. You did some television movies too, that the Count of Monte Cristo,
yes.
and then The Man of the Iron Mask.
Yes.
kind of a phase in your career.
Yes.
How do you account for that? Why were you cast in those?
Well, I was cast in those period things, I think, because I knew how to stand up straight in a costume. You know, it was a kind of method acting time, and everybody was sort of pissing themselves in the rainstorm and all that sort of thing, you know. And I could actually speak clearly and stand up straight, so they kept casting me in these period things, which I loved doing. We worked mostly in Spain on The Three Musketeers. It was one film, by the way, with an intermission, and it was filmed as one film, and they paid us for one film. But then we found out it was going to be two films, and we wanted to be paid for two films, and they said, go yourself. Until there was a clause in, as I understood it, a clause in Raquel Welch's contract that made it possible for us all to get a bit more payment for the second half of this experience. But working with them was wonderful. Raquel was terrific in that movie. She was very funny and very, very good. But she didn't work for about 3 weeks. Her part didn't come, it wasn't to be shot for about 3 weeks. And we heard about all these demands she was making. Her dressing room had to be a certain color, and she had to have flowers, and she had to be addressed as Miss Welch by everybody on the stage and all this stuff. So we all decided we hated her. And then the first day she came to sort of visit the set, and she was wearing this wonderful denim outfit with a lot of skin showing. She was so beautiful and so sweet. And she won us over, you know, just like that. She was, and as I said, she was very, very good in it. But again, being in Spain was a wonderful experience, Seville and all those places. And working with Richard was terrific. He's got this wonderful sense of humor. And playing Aramis was kind of theatrically over the top and all. It was fun.
Now, Monte Cristo and The Man in the Iron Mask were television projects. What did you like better, the television experience or the feature experience when shooting film?
Television has the advantage of being shot faster. It used to drive me crazy on a film set because you wait around and wait around and wait around and wait around. You might shoot 2 or 3 pages a day. In television, even these high-end projects, you'd shoot 6 or 7 or 8 pages a day sometimes. So it's quicker, which is great. And I got to work, for instance, in Man in the Iron Mask with Ralph Richardson. My God, it was an amazing cast. And Vivian Merchant and extraordinary people. And I loved doing it. I loved playing both the parts, you know, the evil king and the nice twin brother and all that. And Monte Cristo was shot in Rome. And that was also a wonderful experience, except I had to go back. I flew to Rome for the beginning of it, and then I had to fly back like overnight to Hollywood to do my death scene in Towering Inferno, and then fly back instantly to Rome. And by the time I got back, I had about 103 temperature. I was feeling rotten and had to keep shooting. So I shot a lot of Count of Monte Cristo feeling rotten. But it turned out pretty well. And the makeup, the Italian makeup people were so great, and the wigs and all were so wonderful. And Trevor Howard and people like that to work with. I've been so lucky.
As an actor, would you say it was more taxing to work on a feature film where you had to wait around a lot?
Yes.
Or as opposed to work fast?
Yes. And miniseries are obviously quicker than, slower than series television, of course, but quicker than, yes, waiting around drives me crazy. Well, you learn to do it. But the problem is you have to stay focused because any minute they're going to say, come and be brilliant, you know, in front of the camera. So you can't get into a novel or anything. I find I can't. I could maybe read a magazine, but it's difficult.
And then the miniseries phase really started with Centennial in 1978.
Yes.
What was the premise of Centennial?
Well, they wanted to tell the entire history of America in 36 hours it was. It was breathtaking. And I was in the first 4 hours as McKeague, this trapper, and got to go from young to old. And Barbara Carrero was Clay Basket, my love interest. And McKeague is one of my favorite characters I've ever played. I liked him so much. He was a frontiersman, he was a trapper, Scotsman. And he had all the masculine abilities, all the masculine qualities that are needed in that incredibly rough atmosphere. And yet, he was a kind, really empathetic, a sensitive guy. So he was both, which I thought was really fun to play, really amazing. I loved him.
How did you get cast?
Don't know.
They came to you? They requested
Yeah,
you?
they came to me. And I got a call from my agent, and I said, absolutely, yes, yes, yes.
Were miniseries even on the map then?
No, they were, well, of course, Portrait of a Lady had, in a sense, been a miniseries. No, Roots was before that, I think. Had Roots happened yet?
It was, I think, late 70s. I'm not sure the exact date, but it was certainly
well,
close.
So Roots, of course, made the miniseries, I guess, a viable possibility because it was humongously.
Right, and Rich Man Poor Man was a huge.
And Rich Man Poor Man, yeah.
In the 70s, I remember.
Very, very, very big. But a 35-hour miniseries was not heard of before.
Now, this was based on a huge novel, so I guess the
Yes.
challenge would be how to make something so episodic like
Yes,
that.
yes.
And in the phase that you were in, what actors were you primarily working with?
This part has to be cut out. I can't remember the Esquinel. I can't remember the actor's name who played that. Yeah. Very, very big television actor.
Okay,
Oh God.
let's see if I have it here.
I knew I would come to this moment.
It's okay.
I can't think of his name.
Centennial was one of the longest television projects up to, and maybe since, 26 and a half hours, I believe. It was huge. Why do you think NBC committed to such a project of that length?
I don't know why NBC committed to such a huge project, and I have heard rumors that they didn't treat the finished product very well in the way they promoted it and showed it. I think it was on at different hours, different days, different times and stuff, which will kill anything. So I'm not sure it had the phenomenal success it should have had. I think the first few hours were big. Oh, I can't think of his name. Anyway, but it was I think not as successful as it should have been because the network didn't handle it very well. That's what I heard.
Given the budget and the scale, was it a more challenging project for you for a television project compared to other things you'd done?
No, I treated it just like the usual acting job. We filmed on location in Colorado, in wonderful locations. There is a side story there, if you want it.
Go.
There was somebody going around molesting and killing young women in that area at that time. And all of a sudden, I was told on the set that the police wanted to see me. And these two policemen escorted me into my caravan. And one sat where you are, asking me questions. The other one was behind me. And they were asking me where I was at such and such time, and blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And I was really scared. I didn't know what was going on. And then they said that I was under suspicion for the rape and murder of these women. And they showed me, because she had somebody drew a picture, or one of them had survived, and she drew a picture of her, or had, the artist draw a picture, and it looked exactly like me. This picture they came up with, a few years ago, it looked exactly like Dr. Kildare is who it looked like. And that's why they were suspicious of me. And it was really scary. It turned out that I had alibis for all these occasions, thank God.
I thought you were going to tell me it was like some big prank or something.
No, it wasn't a prank at all. It was dead serious.
Was the role of McKeague in Centennial, was that an important role for you?
Yes, it was.
How so?
Well, it was important because it was such a good part and such an interesting part. And unlike other parts I had played, and they had contrived a wonderful makeup, beard, and all that stuff looked great. And so I think it added to the possibility of doing other good things.
Do you think this was an important story to tell on American television, Centennial?
Oh, sure. Sure. I have to admit I didn't see it all, but young people, especially these days, don't know anything about American history. And so I think it was probably very educational, as Shogun was about Japan. Americans didn't know anything about Japan, and sushi and all that stuff was not popular before Shogun.
Was Centennial well received?
Critically, I think it was, yes. But as I say, I heard that the network did not present it very well.
When did you first hear of Shogun, the novel by James Clavell?
I was doing a play. Was it Cyrano? It couldn't have been Cyrano. I was doing a play at the Ahmanson Theater in LA. And one night in the dressing room, people had come back to say hello and stuff. And this person I had never seen before said, "Have you read Shogun?" I'd never even heard of Shogun. No. It's written by James Clavell, and you should read it. So I went and got it, about that thick, this book, and loved it. Couldn't put it down. What a read! I think maybe it's the best read of my life, most extraordinary read I've ever had. And I called my agent and I said, "This has got to be a miniseries, and I've got to play Blackthorn." And she said, "Well, that'd be fine, except it's going to be a feature film starring Robert Redford." And I said, "Well, we'll see." And I waited in line. And then it was going to be something else, and then it was going to be something else. And finally, they were unable to write a 2-hour script for this incredibly long story. So it went to NBC, I think it was. It went to television. And I called my agent, and I said, "Flo, now it's it's going to be TV. I've got to play Blackthorn." And she said, "Well, that's fine, Dick, but they want Sean Connery." And I said, "Well, I'm just going to stand in line here." And it turned out that Sean got a movie and was unavailable. And I said, I can. No, they want a British actor. Well, luckily the network was on my side. And so Clavell had to see me, and I had dinner with him and Eric Bercovici, who wrote the script and was a co-producer. I put on a whole bunch of T-shirts under my shirt so I could look bigger, and talked in a kind of lower voice and stuff like that. And he still wasn't convinced, so I went to dinner at his house after that, and met his wife and stuff. And she, thank God, liked me. And finally, Clavell relented, and they hired me. But he was around for the first 2 weeks watching me like a hawk, because I was going to be, if he wasn't satisfied with what I was doing, I was going to be out But he did like what I was doing, and finally was very, actually, kind and complimentary about it. But it was a long and suspenseful wait.
When you first read Shogun, and at that time you weren't aware that it was planned to be a feature film, did you see it as a miniseries?
Absolutely. Perfect. Absolutely. Ideal. The same with the Thornbirds. I mean, it's just an absolutely ideal project for a miniseries.
You met with the author, James Clavell. How did that go, and how did he see you as Blackthorn?
Well, he didn't. As I was explaining earlier, he didn't really want me for Blackthorn. He never talked about how to play Blackthorn. But he was very, very resistant, and it wasn't until I had, as I said, done 2 weeks' work that he thought I was okay. And in fact, he later said that I had, to some extent, held the production together because it was fraught with difficulty. The Japanese side and the American side did not get along. In fact, they were at war. I mean, the Americans went in saying, "Haven't you fuckers ever made a picture before?" And you just don't say something like that.
You're talking about the crews, right?
The crews were at war. And even the production side were a little bit at war. So it was fraught, and I knew that all my eggs were in this basket, and I kept cool through the whole thing, man. I cannot tell you how cool I stayed. And Clavell said, without you keeping your wah, as they say, your harmony, I don't know if we would have made it. Because there were people on the American side who were rebellious and wanted to leave the production. And they stayed.
Was Shogun shot entirely in Japan? Even
Yes,
even
6.5 months.
even the stage
Yeah, 6.5 months, the whole thing. It was a great, great experience.
was part of this war between crews. Was it due to a culture clash? in terms
Yes,
of-
yes. The Americans came in almost like Blackthorne and his crew, and you know, kind of tough, rough. You know, what the fuck are you doing, Billy? And you just don't ever say things like that in Japan. And the Japanese took great offense to all that. Also, we had the problem of having female interpreters, so that the director Jerry London would tell the female Japanese to tell the Japanese assistant directors what to do. And I'm sorry, Japanese men don't take orders from women. They just don't. And that was a problem. There were all kinds of problems and lots of bad feeling. It got so that they, believe it or not, you know, tatami mats in Japanese homes, etc., are never, ever, ever walked on with shoes. Ever, ever, ever. It's like almost religious. And even on sets, the Japanese revered the tatami, and we all walked around in our stocking feet, of course, absolutely. And it got so that the American crew started walking around with their shoes on and their boots on this tatami stuff, just to upset the Japanese. It was like kids. But the show turned out brilliantly, I think.
So what was the basic premise of the story of Shogun?
Well, it was actually about pulling. It was the period in history around 1600, when Japan was a series of fiefdoms and warlords and all that stuff, sort of like Iraq and or Afghanistan, and a guy named Tokugawa, who was called Toranaga in our script, a great samurai, wanted to unify the country, and went about very cleverly defeating when he had to, outmaneuvering when he had to, all these warlords. And Blackthorne shipwrecked in Japan and would have been killed, except that Toranaga figured that he knew a lot about the West that would be good for him to know, and took him on and almost mentored him. And Blackthorne was actually finally made a samurai, which was totally unheard of, this gaijin. But that was the story, that Blackthorne actually helped Toranaga take over and unify Japan.
And working with Japanese actors, that was new, I assume, for you. What
Yes.
was that experience like?
Yes. Fabulous. I mean, Toshiro Mifune was was the Olivier of the Orient. I mean, of Asia. He was a gigantic force of nature, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant actor. Terrifying on the set. He was very diffident when he was in his sort of Western clothes, but get him in those samurai clothes, man, and you didn't dare speak to him unless it had something to do with the production. Huge, huge character. And the other now I can't think of her name. The actress who played Mariko was wonderful, quite tall, and very beautiful and wonderful. Her English was not very good, and she had to loop, actually, her whole performance, because her English got better and better and better as time went on, and she looped it brilliantly. She was fabulous to work with. They were all extraordinarily wonderful. And you'd think, coming from, say, No Drama or Kabuki, which is so big and theatrical, that you might run into sort of over-the-top actors, but they weren't. They were great. Also, showing emotion in Japan is not de rigueur. It's not something that you do. And I found that when they needed to play emotional, especially Mariko, she was sensational. Just sensational. I don't know why, but she was.
There are large passages in that miniseries that were in Japanese, were presented in Japanese.
The network was terrified about that.
Was there a debate about that, whether to put titles or non-subtitles?
Yes, and Clavel and Bercovici and Jerry London absolutely refused to put subtitles. And it was a huge risk because there were lots and lots and lots of pure Japanese spoken. And it worked. And it worked because it was supposed to be mysterious. Blackthorne and his men didn't know Japanese. They didn't know what these people were talking about. So it really worked. It was hugely successful.
Did shooting in Japan enhance or help the final production?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. First of all, just being there all that time, and we had weekends off so we could go explore. For instance, we were 10 weeks in Kyoto, and I got to see practically everything in Kyoto. But yes, the atmosphere of Japan helped us a great deal. Probably even the conflict on the set was helpful in some way. And the wonderful Japanese food and all that stuff was great too.
To play Blackthorn, what did you do to prepare for that role?
Well, I lowered my voice. I got bigger, and I read a lot about him because he was a real person. I read a lot about him. I read a lot about that history, what Japan was like. Japan was unbelievably coercive society at the time. I mean, whatever your station in life was, that's where you were. You were allowed to eat certain things. You were allowed to dress certain ways. You were allowed to You were allowed to be certain places, and that was it. There was no social mobility whatsoever. You were stuck for your life, and so were your family forever. It was a really tough culture. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And Blackthorn, of course, had to cope with all that, and even take a bath, which was unheard of in Europe at the time. So it was wonderful being in Japan and having the Japanese crew and the Japanese wardrobe people and makeup people and all that. It was really good.
Were they long days? Were the shoot days?
Oh, huge. It was hugely difficult work. And Blackthorn had a tremendous amount of exposition, which is telling the audience information and you have to pretend that you're really talking to somebody, and it has emotional content, but it's really just information for the audience. He had an awful lot of that, and that's very hard to do. It makes acting all the more difficult. I found it an excruciatingly difficult job and thrilling at the same time.
Was there much change in the script, or was it pretty set by the time?
No, the script stayed the same. The script was brilliant. Eric Bercovici did a fabulous job.
Was there much time for rehearsal? Or was it just rehearse and block, kind of?
Rehearse and block, and rehearse, maybe 3 or 4 times. Yeah, you go through it 3 or 4 times. And if the scene was particularly difficult, like singing I had to sing this long sea shanty song in one place and dance with Toranaga and all that stuff. That had to be choreographed rather well.
Now, there were a lot of subjects that before Shogun had never really dealt with in television, having to do with taboo subjects, sexuality. I mean, urinating on a character for a particular reason, things like that. Use of words. What do you make about the impact of that and the fact that it was it blazed a trail?
There was a lot of trouble about his what was his name? Anyway, pissing on me, and it was actually a horrible feeling. I was down on the ground and this guy's pissing on me. It was terrible.
And even using the word piss, I think.
They may have, yeah. It's so we've really grown up fast, haven't we? I remember on television when seeing cleavage on a woman was verboten. Dagmar, I think, was the first woman in the early 50s ever to show cleavage on television. We've really come a long way. We curiously naive Americans.
Did you think that the production, the way they presented these taboo subjects, was particularly aware of how it would be accepted by the audience, or did they just go for it?
On the artistic side, they just went for it. On the network side, I think there was a lot of discussion, and the pissing scene was had to be sort of very much pushed through, I think, by the artistic side.
And when you actually got a chance to watch Shogun, what did you think?
Oh, I loved it. I was very frustrated by all the commercials. It's wonderful to get the DVD now and see it without commercials. I think there was a commercial every 5 minutes. That drove me crazy, but seeing it, I was astonished by how good it was and how beautiful it was to look at, and how good everybody was. My God, the actors were just terrific, and the story was unbeatable.
And when Shogun aired, what was the response?
Huge, mammoth. It shut down whole cities. Restaurants went, practically went under because nobody went out. Everybody was home watching Shogun. And then, of course, the Japanese restaurants took off after that. And suddenly sushi became a big deal in America.
Why do you think it was such a phenomenon?
It's such a brilliant story. Also, it was so unusual. People weren't used to spending all that time in Japan with Japanese people and Japanese stories and all that stuff. And I think the Orient had a real magnetic fascination for the American audience. Well, all over the world, but especially the American audience. And it was so exciting. The story was wonderfully exciting and suspenseful. And you cared about Toranaga, and you cared about everybody. And the dangerous moments were so dangerous. I think it was just a phenomenally good story.
You won a Golden Globe for your performance.
Yes.
What was that like?
Wonderful, wonderful. I have 3 or 4 Golden Globes. Winning things is great. I happen to disapprove of treating acting or any kind of art as a horse race. To say, like this year, saying so-and-so is better than so-and-so with these fabulous performances is just dumb. But it's necessary commercially, I think, and all that. I don't. But on the other hand, when you're in that atmosphere and you win, it feels great.
Were you also nominated for an Emmy for that role?
I think so, yes.
And I understand you were the first person interviewed by Entertainment Tonight.
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, a friend of mine came up and said, "We're starting this new interview show, and would you like to be our first interview?" This is a long time ago.
About 1980 or so,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And it was a walk and talk, some interesting place. I can't remember just where. And we did this, Bruce, what was his name, my friend? I can't think of his name. Anyway, we did it, and I thought it was fun. It was no big deal, because who knew the show was going to be so successful? But it was.
Now, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, there were movie magazines
Yes.
and celebrity coverage.
Yes.
But was it more controlled then?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
were the publicists in charge? And
Oh,
then gossip
yes.
columns, and now it's like Wild
Oh,
West.
it's a total free-for-all now, and extremely unkind sometimes. They were a little kinder in the old days. People didn't say everything they knew, and that was partly because they were better human beings.
And were celebrities more protected back
Yes.
30 years ago
Oh,
and before?
absolutely. With the studios and all that system, there were huge power plays going on, and if Hedda wanted to say something, the studio could say, well, then if you say that about so and so, then you will never speak to so and so, so and so, and so and so again. And they had power over the writers, which doesn't exist now, as far as I know.
So back to Shogun, how did that change television?
Shogun? Mm-hmm. Well, it brought in Asia in a big way. It unfortunately didn't change television as much as we would hope, because the business changed so much shortly after those big, wonderful miniseries, and the networks became less powerful because cable brought in so many alternatives, and so they had less money to spend, a smaller audience, less in advertising and all that, and they simply couldn't afford. These Shogun cost a fortune, and the Thornbirds cost huge amounts of money, and they just can't do that anymore. And I'm not even certain the audience with an ADT or whatever that thing is, our attention deficit disorder, would sit through 12 hours and actually stay home every Friday night or Saturday night to see a show. I'm not sure that would happen.
I remember at some point when the miniseries were popular, they were even calling them novels for television. And,
Yeah.
How did Shogun change you professionally and personally?
Well, it paved the way for the Thornbirds, for one thing. It put me at the top of my game. That was the professionally, commercially, etc. That was the high point of my career. that and the Thornbirds. Those are the most famous, apart from Kildare, and the most loved and the most reshown and etc. things that I ever did. Along with Wallenberg and the Bourne Identity and all those, which were terrific, but they're not as big as Shogun and the Thornbirds. That was the peak, career-wise. I did some wonderful things after that, but nothing to quite compare to those two.
What was the basic premise of the Thornbirds?
The basic premise of the Thornbirds was, let's make the best, most high-class, tragedy-driven soap opera of all time. I don't mean to denigrate it. It was brilliantly done and brilliantly cast and a wonderful story. But the absolute top of the heap of pure soap opera, I think. I often am surprised when I think about it that it was and remains so successful, because it was one tragedy after another, after another, after another, after another, after another. Nobody came out on top in that show. Everybody. It was so sad, one thing after another. And these wonderful people, wonderful characters. And Father Ralph was an extraordinary character. He was so driven and so torn. Three ways. I mean, it's one thing to have your heart ripped apart in two directions, but his was in three directions. First of all, he loved God and had a genuine vocation. Secondly, he was enthralled by the power and glamour of the church. And thirdly, he really loved Meggie. It was soulmate love. It was real love. And when you're torn apart between love and God, for God's sake, it's really tough. And he was very attractive. So, as priests sometimes are. It's interesting, we had a technical advisor, a young Jesuit, who was the spitting image of Father Ralph. He was like a California surfer. Women fell down just looking at him. He was so attractive. He actually ended up getting married, as a matter of fact. But he was also a wonderful, wonderful priest, a really powerful, really committed priest. But he got in trouble with the hierarchy because he was questioning obedience, women in the clergy, and celibacy. And that got him in big trouble.
You mentioned that the Shogun led to the Thornbirds. Did they just come to you and they offered you the role of Father Ralph?
Yes. That's the one that came easy. Well, and once they decided not to make a feature with Robert Redford and everything, but then it fell into my lap. And it's funny because I did some screen tests with Rachel and with another wonderful actress, and I was so awful and looked so bad in these screen tests that I'm amazed that they actually kept me on, but they did, and it turned out okay.
1983 is when the Thornbirds first aired, and at that time, had you already been kind of dubbed the king of the miniseries?
Yeah, I think so. That came along sometime in there.
How did you take?
Which was fine. I don't know if it's better than the third-rate nobody of the miniseries. It was complimentary. It's hype, obviously hype, but it's a nice compliment.
Tell me about the casting of Meggie. I understand it got down to Rachel Ward and Jane Seymour.
Yes.
How was the decision made?
People thought I made the decision. I did not make the decision. It was producers and directors who made the decision. I think they went with Rachel because she was new, and because she might have been a bit more vulnerable. I'm not quite certain. Nobody ever discussed this with me that I can recall. But I think there was a freshness about her, and in terms of the audience, of course, had never heard of her, as far as I know, that drew them to Rachel. And I think she was wonderful.
And Jane might have been a little more stronger as a...
She might have been a bit stronger. She might have been... She certainly was well known, well, very famous at the time, and wonderful. She would have been terrific as Meggie, but perhaps a little more knowing than they wanted Meggie to be. Perhaps a little more sophisticated.
And at that level, did you test with both of them?
Yes.
What was that like?
Awful. Because until I kind of know what I'm doing, and until I have a hold on the character, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm terrible at cold readings and stuff like that. So I haven't a clue what to do until I've kind of gotten hold of the guy. And I hadn't gotten hold of him yet. And so I was just awful in both of these. Just awful.
I think one of the many reasons the Thornbirds was so hugely popular, especially with females, was the chemistry between you and Rachel Ward,
Yes.
those two characters. Was that from the beginning? Did you know
Yes.
it was there right at the beginning?
Well, I suspected it was there, and the wonderful thing about it was that we really trusted each other. We never talked about it, but we really tried. We had to do a lot of love scenes and a lot of very emotional scenes together. And we just I could feel she trusted me. And also there was the added thing that she was falling in love with Brian Brown at the time, who played her husband in the thing. So she had this glow about her. And I just assumed, as the character, I assumed it was for me. She must be in love with me. She was actually in love with Brian.
And this is outside the story,
Outside
right?
the story.
This is real life.
Yeah, this is real life. She married him, and they live in Australia and have kids, and they have a wonderful life together now. But yes, I think I felt, and they threw her into. Producers are funny this way. If they can, they'll throw you for your first scene into the most difficult scene in the script, and they did that to her. She had to be. It was after Father Ralph sort of ignores her at a big party, and she's brokenhearted, and she's out with the horses and stuff. It's a very, very difficult scene, and Rachel is new, and not terribly experienced, and she was having trouble with this scene, and I felt so much that I wanted to help her, and that kind of thing. The press picked it up and thought that we were having a big fight, which was absolutely untrue. No, we weren't, and the scene ended up fine. But maybe partly because of that, we trusted each other completely, and it was a joy working with her, really a joy.
Did you do research for the role?
Yes, oh yes. Father Sweeney, who was our technical advisor, got me into a novitiate in downtown LA, and I got to stay there a couple of nights and be with these young potential priests in their classes and in their work and in their, I can't talk about this without breaking down in tears. It's happening already. They had mass every morning up in the attic of one of these old buildings that they worked in, and I'd been with Terry to a lot of Catholic mass services and things, and talked to him a lot about it, and had never been moved. I'm not partial to the Catholic faith anyway, but I went to this mass in this. And the responses, in church, the responses are, and to you, with these novitiates and the priest in this mass, the responses were like heartfelt and big and wonderful. And the priest had said to them at the beginning, because he knew I wasn't totally welcome with the young people at the time, he said, this is what I can't talk about without tearing up. He said, when there's a new person with us, a new person with us, then Christ is really present. He didn't mean that the person was Christ, but that the Spirit was especially present. And I started to weep, and tears running down my face. And that's when the other young potential priests kind of made friends with me, and they kind of took me in. But it was wonderful because what they would do, they would study all morning and then they would go out to the most difficult jobs in prisons and stuff and work with the prisoners and people on death row and all that. These young people were so completely dedicated. It was quite wonderful.
The story takes place in Australia,
Yes.
yet it was shot largely, I understand, in Simi Valley, California,
Yes.
in the San Fernando, adjacent to the San Fernando Valley.
Yes.
Did that affect, I mean, it was a powerful story, and I don't think people would ever have guessed that. But did it affect the actors during the production? Did it matter?
I don't think it mattered at all because it looked great, Simi Valley, and there weren't many helicopters going over or anything happening. And the set was wonderful. And people who saw it said that Australians who saw it said they were pretty convinced that it was Australia. I did a sort of sequel to it, a midquel, which should never have been made, actually, in Australia. And it was maybe preferable to work in Australia, but it didn't really make that much difference to the actors.
Okay. What was the set like in terms of the atmosphere, creatively with the actors?
Real good. Stanwyck, of course, was just phenomenal. Everything good you've ever heard about her is true to the max. Amazingly professional, wonderful to be around, wonderful to act with. She knew her lines totally at the first read-through. She would say to the cameraman, "You'll get this look, won't you? This is the first read-through." She was so totally immersed in it already. And working with her, she never varied at all. You do take after take after take sometimes, for various reasons. She never varied it. She never changed anything. And she was new every time, absolutely fresh every time. She was terrific. I loved her.
What about the producers? What was it like working with Stan Margulies and
Oh,
David
wonderful.
Wolper?
Wonderful, except we had a lot of run-ins about Father Ralph. They wanted to make him more of a jerk than he really was. You know, because my point was that he did love God, and he did love the church, and he really did love Meggie. He wasn't fooling around. And they, I think, wanted him to fool around more. And we had a lot of memos and a lot of talks about all that. I didn't get much changing, but in the way I played it, it could change.
And the director, Daryl Duke, what was your experience working with him?
Fabulous, absolutely fabulous. Loved him, absolutely loved him. And he would do as many retakes as one wanted, which got him in trouble with the producer sometimes, but he was fabulous to work with.
Any disagreements that you might have had with the writer and producers, was it all about story?
Yes, totally. Totally about Father Ralph's character.
Was the writer present? I mean,
Yes, she was around a lot. We got to be great friends and laughed a lot. Oh boy, she was funny. I mean, she's Carmen Culver's is a great person. But she didn't really understand what I was talking about until well into the production. And she said, "Oh, now I get what you're talking about." It's not that she's dumb, it's just I wasn't explaining it very well, I guess.
Tell me about did you get along with Rachel Ward during the shoot itself?
Yes, I got along wonderfully well with Rachel, but she was very private, very serious about it. This was a huge step for her. She had Sandra Seacat, a wonderful acting teacher, with her a lot of the time. And so we didn't hang around a lot together. She'd be in her dressing room working, and she was relatively private during the shoot. We were friends and all, but we didn't go out to dinner or anything that I can remember, which is a pity because I worked with her again. Well, I was in the same show with her 25 years later, not too long ago, a miniseries called Blackbeard, which we shot in Thailand. And I thought, oh, great, I get to see Rachel again. But then I read the script and we didn't have any scenes together. And so I hadn't seen her for 25 years. And we met in the airport. She was flying out and I was just flying in, and we had about 15 or 20 minutes together in the airport. She's more beautiful than ever, happy, free, wonderful. It was great to see her again.
During the Thornbird shoot, did you talk to her about scenes at all, or did you give her any advice?
No, I never gave her any advice. I'm sure we talked about the scenes, but probably not a whole lot. Probably not a lot. I I think she did most of her talking about the scenes with the director and with Sandra. I don't recall sitting down and saying, how do we do this? I think we just leapt in rehearsal and did it and tried stuff.
And there was one famous love scene. Tell me about shooting that. And did you have to, I understand that David Wolpar got involved and had to be, it was reshot or what? Tell me about that experience.
No, I don't recall reshooting that scene on the beach. It was wonderful to play because by that time we knew each other really well, and the story had developed, and the suspense had developed, and the tension, the sexual tension between them had developed to such a degree that when I finally threw down my coat and chased after her on the beach, it was hot. It was really hot. It was thrilling to do that, and I don't recall.
Well, maybe it was a request to do it again, but actually it didn't need to get done again. Something about.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I wonder what did you hear was wrong with it? Or
That David Wolpar had asked to do it again because the first one didn't have enough passion. But then,
really?
But then, as it turns out, it obviously had plenty of passion.
Oh, well, maybe we just did more takes or something. I don't recall going and reshooting it.
Yeah. When you were with Rachel Ward doing this scene and other scenes, the love scenes, Newsweek called it the most erotic love scene ever to ignite the home screen.
Oh, really? Oh, boy.
Were you too conscious about bringing something to that, or was it just
No,
like you
of
said,
course.
it had involved? I mean,
Of course. I mean, we knew this was hot stuff, man. They were really in love. And they were both beautiful. They were both great people. My God, it was one of the great love affairs of the world, except that God was in there between them and other things.
what was the most difficult thing to shoot for you, or difficult scene or sequence?
There were some prayer sequences I remember feeling that I wasn't getting it quite right, but when I saw it again, I thought, no, that was okay. There was a scene with Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons, there were two scenes actually with Gene Simmons. Gene Simmons was so present. She was so centered that I found her a little scary. I liked her. I thought she was wonderful. But she scared me a little bit. I think possibly because I felt she was actually more centered than I was. And I flubbed lines in both of these scenes, I remember, more than usual. And in one, I was so angry with myself, I slammed my hand down on sometimes the dolly has a padded seat for the cameraman. And what I didn't know is that there's a metal strip down the middle of the pad. And I slammed my fist down on this seat and broke this bone. And was royally pissed off at myself. We managed to disguise it for the rest of the shoot, but I had to wear a little gizmo for a while. But I think those were the two most difficult scenes I remembered, because I felt somehow not quite up to her.
And what scene or scenes did you afterwards think this, or feel the most rewarding for you?
There were scenes with Stanwyck, especially her last scene, which she was so good. And I basically had to just stand there. But watching her work, and that was, I think, maybe the last thing she did. Oh my God, she was so brilliant. And there were love scenes with Rachel that were wonderful. In the barn, I remember a scene where we finally were kissing and stuff, and then I pushed it away. I said, God, what are you doing to me? It was so difficult to play, so difficult to find those warring passions. Extraordinary.
Do you have a favorite moment in the film?
To watch?
Yes.
I would say probably Stanwyck in her last scene, and there were scenes with Rachel that I love watching. I don't know that I could choose, but we had some wonderful scenes together, Rachel and I.
The Thornburns was also a phenomenon with the audiences. Why do you think they were so enthralled and entranced by this love story?
People will always be entranced by a good love story. This love story was especially good because the things that makes love stories watchable and fascinating and suspenseful and riveting, the things are obstacles between them, misunderstandings and obstacles. And you can't find a bigger obstacle than God. I mean, that's as obstacle-y as you can get. And also, I think priests, especially good-looking, attractive priests, are fascinating to women because they're unavailable, really unavailable. And Father Ralph, of course, was somewhat available, and certainly his heart was completely available to her, but, well, not completely. Should have been, was, but this other belief system was so intensely between them that I think that's what, and the story was so interesting, and the family stories and all the side stories were so interesting. But that, I think, was that you get two very attractive people madly in love with each other and then keep them apart. I think that people find that fascinating.
And I think the two words I heard often used were forbidden love.
Forbidden. Yeah.
Okay.
Forbidden love. And it was totally forbidden.
We're going to change tape.